I look back over my life. What message do I want to leave? Each and every one of you has a role to play. Your life matters.
Jane Goodall has been known as the gentle voice of nature, the woman who changed the world's understanding of animals, intelligence, and compassion. With her soft-spoken wisdom and fearless devotion to chimpanzees, she became one of the most respected scientists of all time. But while the world admired her calm presence and boundless empathy, few knew the heartbreaking personal cost behind her life's work. Jane Goodall's love story began in the jungles of Tanzania, not with a movie star romance or glamorous Hollywood affair, but with a man who shared her passion for the wild. His name was Hugo van Lawick, a daring wildlife photographer who captured some of the most iconic images of her groundbreaking research. Together they seemed like the perfect match, two adventurers in love, building both a legacy and a life in the untamed wilderness. But behind the camera flashes and National Geographic fame, their marriage was slowly unraveling. The isolation of the jungle, endless work, and their growing ambitions pulled them in different directions. Jane, devoted to her chimpanzees, found herself married to a man who was drifting away, both emotionally and spiritually. When Jane Goodall finally decided to end the marriage, it shocked everyone who had believed in their fairy tale bond. But the real reason behind their divorce wasn't simple. It was a mix of love, sacrifice, and a truth about human nature that even Jane herself had to confront. What she later revealed about the breakdown of her marriage will forever change how the world sees this legendary woman. Long before she became a global icon, Jane Goodall was just a young English girl with an extraordinary dream. Born in 1934 in London, Jane didn't grow up with scientific privilege or a famous family name. Instead, she was raised by a single mother who encouraged her wild curiosity about the natural world. While other children played with dolls, Jane spent her days watching earthworms, climbing trees, and reading about animals. She was fascinated by the idea that humans and creatures of the wild shared a deeper connection, a belief that would one day define her life's work. In 1957, fate intervened when a friend invited Jane to Kenya. She was 23, had no formal scientific degree, and worked as a secretary to make ends meet. Yet that trip changed everything. There, she met the famed anthropologist Dr. Louis Leakey, who immediately saw something remarkable in her. Not just passion, but a quiet determination that refused to bend. Leakey offered her an opportunity that would alter history, to study chimpanzees in the remote forests of Gombe Stream. Tanzania, Jane accepted, unaware that she was walking into one of the most dangerous and defining adventures of her life. The conditions were brutal: heat, disease, isolation, but Jane didn't flinch. She lived alone among the chimpanzees, patiently observing them day after day, slowly gaining their trust. Her groundbreaking discovery that chimpanzees use tools shattered the scientific belief that humans were the only tool makers. Suddenly, the world knew her name. As her fame grew, so did the challenges. Reporters and filmmakers were eager to document the young woman who lived among apes. And that's when Hugo van Lawick, a charismatic Dutch wildlife photographer working for National Geographic, entered her life. Sent to capture her research on film, Hugo brought not only his camera but also a sense of companionship Jane hadn't felt in years. Their connection was instant. Both were explorers at heart, driven, fearless, and utterly captivated by nature. Days spent tracking chimpanzees turned into long nights of conversation under starlit African skies. For Jane, who had spent years in near solitude, Hugo's presence was a breath of life. In 1964, the two married in a modest ceremony in London, surrounded by colleagues and close friends. At first, it seemed perfect. Together, they were the golden couple of wildlife conservation, a brilliant scientist and a world-class photographer creating documentaries that captivated millions. Their work brought the story of Gombe's chimpanzees into living rooms around the globe, inspiring a generation to care for the environment. But while their partnership flourished professionally, cracks slowly began to appear in their marriage. The same wilderness that had brought them together was now pulling them apart. The endless travel, the pressure of global fame, and the unforgiving life in the jungle began to wear on Hugo. He longed for comfort, civilization, and structure. Things Jane had long since abandoned. Jane, on the other hand, found her identity entirely rooted in Gombe. The forest wasn't just her workplace, it was her soul. She had bonded deeply with the chimpanzees, especially one she named David Graybeard, who became the symbol of her mission. For her, leaving the forest meant leaving herself behind. And while their love remained, their worlds were no longer the same. Jane's devotion to science and Hugo's yearning for adventure had taken different paths. What began as a shared dream was quietly turning into a test neither of them saw coming. The cracks in their relationship were forming, subtle at first, but destined to grow. And soon Jane Goodall would have to face a heartbreaking truth about love, sacrifice, and what it means to choose between passion and partnership. While Jane Goodall's marriage to Hugo Van Lowick began with passion and shared purpose, the very world that had brought them together, the wild and unpredictable terrain of Tanzania, also became the force that slowly pulled them apart. At first, their partnership seemed destined for greatness. Hugo, with his keen photographic eye, captured the magic of Jane's groundbreaking research at Gombe Stream National Park. His stunning images helped the world see chimpanzees not as mindless creatures, but as emotional, intelligent beings with complex social lives. Jane's discoveries, combined with Hugo's visuals, made them a legendary duo, the scientist and the storyteller. But beneath the surface, their marriage was starting to fracture. The long days in the field, the grueling work, and the lack of privacy all began to take a toll. Hugo's assignments often took him far from Gombe, while Jane remained deeply rooted in her research. When he returned, he would bring tales of other places and people, while Jane's world remained centered around her chimps. Slowly, two separate lives began to form within one marriage. Their professional collaboration, once their strongest bond, began to create emotional distance. Hugo's work demanded constant travel. He was a man of movement, forever chasing light, landscapes, and wildlife across Africa. Jane, on the other hand, found her soul anchored to the forests of Gombe. Her loyalty to her research and her chimpanzees was unwavering, but it meant she couldn't follow him everywhere. "The chimps were like family," she later said, "and I couldn't abandon them." But this dedication, admirable as it was, left Hugo feeling isolated, a bystander in his wife's love affair with science and nature. Then came the subtle but devastating realization: their paths, though both noble, were no longer converging. Their communication began to fade, replaced by long silences and short visits. What once had been an equal partnership was turning into two individuals chasing separate destinies. Jane would later describe that time as one of lonely, understanding the painful, awareness that love can still exist even when a marriage cannot survive, adding, to the tension was the contrast in their personalities. Jane was introspective, deeply spiritual, and content with solitude. Hugo was adventurous, social, and restless. The same qualities that had initially attracted them became the very ones that pushed them apart. When their son, Grub, was born in 1967, both parents adored him, but raising a child in the wilderness added new challenges. Jane wanted Grub to experience nature's wonder, while Hugo grew increasingly concerned about the dangers of disease and isolation. Eventually, even the vast beauty of Africa could not mend what was broken. Their marriage had become a quiet casualty of two powerful callings, hers to the chimps, his to the camera. Despite their separation, there was never bitterness or blame between them. They continued to respect each other deeply and even collaborated after their divorce in 1974. It was a bond of friendship and shared history, rather than romance. Looking back, Jane often reflected that their love was real, but their lives were too vast to fit within one marriage. In her words, "We were both drawn to the wild, just in different ways." It's a sentiment that speaks to the heart of their story. Two visionaries who found love in the wilderness but were ultimately claimed by it by the time the world learned of their divorce. Jane had already become a global icon, and Hugo continued his celebrated career as a filmmaker and photographer. Yet, behind the acclaim and the accolades, there lingered a quiet sadness, the kind that comes from knowing that even the most beautiful love stories sometimes end not in anger, but in acceptance. Their split wasn't a failure, it was an evolution. And for Jane Goodall, it became one of life's profound lessons, that love can be both fleeting and eternal, changing form but never truly disappearing. After the end of her marriage to Hugo van Lawick, Jane Goodall found herself standing at a crossroads, one path leading back to the familiar comfort of the forest, the other toward an unknown future that demanded strength she didn't yet know she possessed. Though she had faced lions, leopards, and the harsh realities of the wild, nothing felt as emotionally brutal as the quiet emptiness of a life without her husband by her side. Yet, in that stillness, Jane discovered something extraordinary, a new kind of peace. She returned to Gombe, the place where it had all begun, and threw herself into her work with renewed purpose. The chimpanzees, who had once been the center of her professional life, now became her emotional refuge. She watched them not just as a scientist, but as a fellow being seeking solace. She observed the way they cared for one another, how they grieved, and how they moved on. In their silent understanding, she found comfort, and perhaps a reflection of her own heart's journey. Her growing fame could have easily pulled her into the glamorous world of lectures and awards, but Jane remained humble, preferring the rustle of leaves and the calls of the forest over the applause of crowds. Yet invitations poured in from around the world. People wanted to hear from the woman who had redefined humanity's understanding of animals. Reluctantly at first, she began to travel, sharing her discoveries and advocating for wildlife conservation. These journeys, meant to educate others, became part of her own healing process. But life had more surprises in store. In 1975, while attending a conservation conference, Jane met Derek Bryson, a Tanzanian parliament member and the director of the country's national parks. He was charming, intelligent, and deeply respectful of her work. Unlike Hugo, Derek's life was rooted in administration and policy rather than adventure and field work. For the first time in years, Jane felt seen not as a scientist or public figure, but as a woman. Their connection grew quietly but steadily, built on shared ideals and mutual respect. When Jane married Derek in 1975, it marked a new chapter of emotional fulfillment. He supported her unconditionally, often using his influence to help protect Gombe and its wildlife. For Jane, this marriage brought stability, something she had never experienced before. "Derek was my rock," she would later say. "He gave me the strength to face the world beyond the forest." With him, she learned that love doesn't always have to burn fiercely. Sometimes it glows gently, like the warmth of sunlight through the trees. However, their happiness was tragically short-lived. In 1980, Derek was diagnosed with cancer. Jane, who had devoted her life to studying the circle of life in nature, suddenly found herself confronting it in the most personal way. She stayed by his side through every stage of his illness, refusing to leave his care to anyone else. When he passed away later that year, Jane was once again plunged into grief. But this time, she faced it differently. She didn't retreat to the shadows of sorrow. Instead, she turned her pain into purpose. She began to travel the world more extensively, raising awareness about conservation, animal rights, and environmental responsibility. Every speech she gave, every program she launched, carried a piece of Derek's legacy with it. Through loss, Jane found mission, and through mission, she found healing. Her resilience became legendary. Even as the years passed, Jane Goodall never remarried. She once said, "I was lucky enough to love deeply twice. That's more than many people ever experience." Her story wasn't about heartbreak alone. It was about transformation, proof that love in all its forms can shape a person far beyond the boundaries of romance. In her heart, both Hugo and Derek remained, one representing the wild beauty of discovery, the other the quiet strength of devotion. And Jane, ever the observer, understood that life itself is a series of connections, some brief, some eternal, all teaching us how to love, lose, and begin again. As the decades passed, Jane Goodall's name became synonymous with compassion, wisdom, and unshakable strength. Yet behind her calm smile and dignified grace was a story few truly understood. The emotional truth about her first marriage and why it had to end despite the love that once seemed unbreakable. For years, Jane remained silent on the subject of her divorce from Hugo Van Loick. When asked in interviews, she would gently redirect the conversation back to chimpanzees, to conservation, to anything but her own heartbreak. But eventually she decided to open up. And what she revealed was as profound as it was heartbreaking. In a rare interview, Jane spoke candidly about how her relationship with Hugo had slowly unraveled, not because of betrayal or lack of love, but because of their shared devotion to something larger than themselves. "We loved each other deeply," she admitted, "but we belonged to different worlds. He needed freedom, movement, and discovery. I needed roots, focus, and connection. The jungle gave us both what we wanted, and took it away at the same time." She explained that the very qualities that brought them together, passion, independence, and ambition, were the same forces that pulled them apart. Their lives became an endless balancing act between their relationship and their calling. "We were both trying to do something extraordinary," she said softly. "But sometimes, when two people chase different stars, they drift away, even if they started on the same path." Her honesty struck a chord with millions who had idolized her storybook marriage. It revealed a human side of Jane that few had seen, a woman who had sacrificed personal happiness for purpose. But Jane didn't see it as tragedy. In her eyes, love had simply changed form. She and Hugo continued to share mutual respect, even after the divorce, co-parenting their son and remaining lifelong friends until his death in 2002. What truly amazed people was Jane's perspective on forgiveness and acceptance. "Life in the forest taught me that nothing stays the same," she reflected. "Leaves fall, rivers change course, animals come and go. It's the same with people. Love can evolve, and that doesn't mean it was ever less real." Her ability to transform pain into wisdom became a cornerstone of her legacy. Instead of allowing heartbreak to define her, Jane used it to deepen her understanding of life and empathy. In many ways, the heartbreak she endured helped her connect more deeply with the creatures she studied. She saw the emotions of chimpanzees, their joy, grief, affection, not as mere animal instincts, but as reflections of her own humanity. Even in her later years, when she looked back on her two marriages, she spoke with gratitude rather than regret. Hugo had been her partner in discovery. Derek, her partner in peace. "I learned something vital from each of them," she once said. "From Hugo, I learned the power of curiosity. From Derek, the power of stability. And from both, the courage to keep going." Now, at over 90 years old, Jane Goodall remains one of the most admired figures of our time. She continues to travel, speak, and inspire, carrying forward the lessons that her loves, losses, and life in the jungle taught her. Her story isn't just about the woman who changed how we see animals. It's about the woman who showed the world what it truly means to love selflessly. In the end, the real reason behind her divorce wasn't betrayal, failure, or scandal. It was the price of greatness. Jane's love for humanity and nature demanded everything she had to give. And though her heart was tested by loss, she emerged stronger, proving that even the deepest heartbreak can blossom into purpose. As Jane herself once said with a gentle smile, "Maybe love never really leaves us. It just takes new shapes, in our memories, in our work, and in the lives we touch."